I have a feeling I know what some of you are thinking. What could DevOps possibly have to do with politics? Or even the reverse, what does politics, that loaded subject that we're supposed to avoid in polite company, what could that possibly have to do with DevOps? Well, let's consider this quote. I looked for the source of it, and it's been attributed to many people, so I'm going to say the original source is unknown, but the idea that every company is a software company. Now, in every modern company today, software and technology are deeply embedded in how they serve their customers, how they ship their goods or services, and hopefully, ultimately win portions of the market. Now, just like every modern company is a software company, every modern political campaign is also a software company. Technology, for better or worse, allows campaigns to engage with voters on a level that was unthinkable even only a decade ago. So this means political campaigns need DevOps principles and technologies just as much as modern businesses. In fact, they actually need them more, because working on a political campaign involves shipping software on the tightest budgets, in the shortest time frames, and with the highest stakes imaginable. Moreover, technology changes and moves on in between elections. The 4 years between presidential elections are an eternity in terms of technology. Now, even with shorter election cycles, like say offices that are re-elected every 2 years, what worked in the last election technically is likely out of date by the time the next one rolls around. Now, although I will mention some specific technologies I've used in the past, this talk is not meant to be an in-depth discussion or prescription for any of those specific tools. This is because even though technology moves on between elections, the principles we apply to the use of that technology remain the same. This is the beauty of DevOps. Even as technology evolves and changes, the principles still remain relevant. I love this quote from Effective DevOps by Jennifer Davis and Catherine Daniels. Many people think about DevOps as specific tools like Chef or Docker, but tools alone are not DevOps. What makes tools DevOps is the manner of their use, not fundamental characteristics of the tools themselves. And that is the point of this talk. In this day and age, for better or worse, politics and technology are deeply intertwined. Our tools are more powerful than they have ever been. But when used improperly, they can be destructive rather than constructive. Principles like those in DevOps help keep us on that constructive side. Now, sometimes when I mention that I've worked on political campaigns, I hear responses like this. I'm just not a political person. All politicians are the same. And this one's the big one. I refuse to choose the lesser of two evils. Now, holding these attitudes is certainly someone's right, but the truth is politics affects you whether you are involved in it or not. This is because, as we know, I think better than any region here in DC, is that American society is governed by a representative democracy. That means the results of elections will potentially profoundly affect your life, and certainly at least the life of someone that you care about. Now, I made the decision to become involved in political campaigns because I want to help shape the way our society is governed, even in the smallest of ways. And who I am is Nell Shamrell-Harrington. I'm a senior engineer at Chef. I work mainly on Habitat. I'm also CTO of Operation Code. As was mentioned in the intro, our mission is to teach software engineering skills to military veterans. If you're interested in Operation Code, please find me either after the talk or sometime at the conference. I would love to tell you more about it. I've been a technical volunteer on multiple campaigns, and if you want to tweet at me, I'm at Nell Shamrell. Now, before I go on, I want to mention that I debated quite a bit whether I should name specific campaigns in this talk. I worried that all the strong emotions around them would overshadow the principles I want to discuss. I ultimately decided to mention specific campaigns when it is necessary for context. Although I will mention them by name, this talk is not about my personal political views, nor those espoused by those campaigns. If you want to ask me about my personal views, you're more than welcome to ask me privately, maybe not when we're in a federal building, but I knew that would get a laugh with this audience. But at happy hour, sometime during the conference, just find me. I'm happy to talk to you about them. But my personal political views are not the purpose of this talk. Frankly, this talk can apply to any business or campaign, regardless of what position they take on certain issues. Now, again, because we're in a federal building, I want to make this very clear. This talk does not advocate for any political view or any campaign, party, candidate, or group. With the exception of one, all the campaigns and organizations I mentioned in this talk either no longer exist or are no longer active. This is about my past experiences of applying DevOps principles to these political campaigns. It's not about any current or future ones. So let's go back to this. Again, just like every modern company is a software company, every political campaign is also a software company. Now, it can be tempting to jump immediately into the technical implementations when discussing technology in a campaign, but technical implementations are useless if we don't understand the problem we are solving and what the goal of solving that problem is. At a high level, one of the major differences between a traditional business and a political campaign is that the ultimate success of a business is measured in money. That's the point of a business. That has always been the point of a business. Even with a nonprofit business, their success is often measured by how they're able to raise funds and use those funds. Now, political campaigns certainly do need and use money, but the ultimate success of a campaign is measured in votes. That's really all that matters in the end. Votes are what determines who wins an election, which determines the direction of a city, state, country, even the world for years and possibly decades to come. The reality that we have to acknowledge is that we don't reset in between terms of office. Whenever someone new is elected to an office, they have to build on or in spite of the actions of those who came before. Now, all of the resources, all of the energy, all of the work, all of the money that goes into a campaign has the goal of winning people's votes. And I think of winning someone's vote as an equation with three things. To win someone's vote, you do need to first win their heart. In order to cast a vote for something or someone, especially if it involves a voter changing their mind, they need to make an emotional connection first. Even if they feel they won't be directly affected by the outcome of the election, they can still make a personal connection with someone who will be. Now, this is very similar to DevOps transformations in businesses. In order to even consider changing the way they think about something, someone, whether that's a voter, whether it's an executive, a manager, or an IT engineer, they need to make an emotional connection first. They need to viscerally feel how that change will affect their life for the better. And then comes the mind. Once someone has made a connection on an emotional level, that's when they can process the intellectual reasons why they might choose to vote a certain way. Now, I see a lot of campaigns trying to appeal to the mind first without addressing the heart, which is fine if you are trying to keep something the way it is. But as much as we might like to think of ourselves as rational human beings, I mean, I'm an engineer. I would love to believe that I make decisions based purely on rationality. The truth is, I really don't. I become open to change when I can feel how it will make my life or the life of someone I care about better. In order to change something at the societal level, you really can't do that on your own. You need the heart first, and only then can you appeal to the mind. And finally, the last thing that makes up a vote is motivation. It doesn't matter how much someone emotionally or intellectually connects with your campaign if they don't get out and turn that ballot in or don't get out to the polls. That's why campaigns spend so much time and resources on get out the vote efforts in the weeks leading up to Election Day. Now, any technical solution we would build or use in a campaign had to serve these three things. Again, the goal of any technology in a campaign is to win votes. In order to win someone's heart, mind, and motivation, speed is critical. The reason speed matters so much is that when you are first to reach a voter, you control the narrative. At least that's usually the case. It's similar to how a business that goes to market first controls the narrative around that market, at least for a time, and is at a major advantage. So speed is critical, but accuracy is also critical. When you ship software as a business or as a campaign, I really wish this went without saying, but it really doesn't. It has to work. It doesn't matter what it was intended to do or how much effort went into it if it just doesn't work on a fundamental level. Now, in particular, in a campaign, once you reach election day, there are no do-overs. There's no chance for a 2.0, at least not until the next election cycle. In order for technology to have its intended effect, it needs to work right the first time. Now, one of the best ways to help balance speed and accuracy is through automation, which is one of the main things we think of when we hear the word DevOps. But I want to add a caveat. The right automation enables speed and accuracy. Automating the wrong things may add to speed, but it will come at the cost of accuracy. Now, we'll cover the wrong kind of automation in just a bit, but first let's focus on examples of the right automation. In particular, automation is very helpful with large volunteer forces. Volunteers really are the backbone of any political campaign. Success is just impossible without them. During the 2016 presidential election, I volunteered with an organization called DevProgress. While we were not directly a part of the Hillary for America campaign, we did work with them and created applications that were used by that campaign. The focus of DevProgress was on technical volunteers, and there were a lot of technical volunteers who were very eager to help with that campaign. But one of the realities of depending on volunteer work is that both time and motivation are constantly at risk of running out. In order to fully use volunteers' talent and energy, and most important, preserve their motivation, we need to get them up, running, and coding as fast as possible. So this is one of the projects we created, and it's called Drive the Vote. The idea behind this application is to allow anyone who needs a ride to the voting polls to request one, and a volunteer will pick them up and take them to the polls. We did use this in the 2016 election. Now, regardless of who someone was voting for, we did not ask that. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for anyone to get to the polls and cast their vote. Now, our projects were run in an open source fashion, and it's a common problem in open source to have contributors who have very different workstations. In order to get contributors up and running as fast and coding as fast as possible, we decided to use virtual workstations. In the GitHub repo of Drive the Vote, we have a Vagrant file, which allows someone to quickly spin up a Vagrant box where they can do their development, one, with all the required versions of all the required dependencies already set up for them, and two, in a way that would be unlikely to affect their local workstation. So this meant a contributor could be developing on Linux, Mac, Windows, anything that supports Vagrant, and by spinning up that Vagrant box and SSHing into it, instantly be using the same development environment as all the other contributors. Embracing an automated virtual workstation meant we could get new contributors up and running in consistent environments very quickly, which is essential in an election campaign when, again, every second counts. So our contributors could get coding really fast. But remember, speed alone is not sufficient. We could not sacrifice quality. In an election, again, there are very rarely second chances. If an app did not work the way it was supposed to the first time, or if it broke, there was no time to rewrite it, and most of the time, no time to heavily debug it. So we knew going into this campaign that we needed to automate checks for quality as much as possible, both to let us work at that high speed and to prevent us from diverging too far in the wrong direction. Now, one of the most effective ways to do this is through continuous integration. So this is another project I worked on with DevProgress called Hillary B&B. And this app was created to help match campaign volunteers with a place to stay when they were volunteering away from home. Now, this tool was originally created by Bernie Sanders supporters in the Democratic primary. They released it under a GPL license, so after the primary, we forked it and added quite a bit of functionality to it. And this is an example of a build of Hillary B&B in Circle CI. We would do a complete build, testing all dependencies, and then run the actual automated test for the application. This meant we were always testing from a fresh build and could instantly see when there was an issue. Now, doing the full build was particularly helpful when we were setting up the operations of the application. We could find those integration issues and fix them very early when the application was still at its most flexible. So these are examples of what I consider the right automation. Both Drive the Vote and Hillary B&B existed to foster human connections. Automation should enable human connections rather than trying to replace them. Remember this equation? Getting a vote involves capturing someone's heart, then their mind, and then ensuring they have the motivation to actually cast their vote. And that requires a personal connection with another human being. Now, one of my least favorite examples of automation, and definitely what I consider the wrong kind of automation, is robocalls. I don't know about you, but the only emotional connection I feel with a robocall is massive irritation that borders on rage. Personal connections, human being to human being, that is what will capture a voter's heart and mind and motivate them to turn in that ballot. Now, one of the best examples of this that I have been involved in was the Approve Referendum 74 campaign in Washington State. Referendum 74, which came on the ballot in 2012, was about gay marriage. If approved, gay marriage would be legal in Washington State. If denied, it would not be legal. Now, before 2012, no gay marriage law had ever been successful at the ballot box. The success of Proposition 8 in 2008 really shocked marriage equality advocates. Something clearly was not working for the majority of voters who were motivated to get to the polls or turn that ballot in. Now, in 2010, the Freedom to Marry organization conducted a study trying to figure out what it was that wasn't working, and they found out it was actually the messaging. Gay marriage can seem like a black or white issue, but it was not a black or white issue to a critical section of voters. The study found that a significant group, the ones who could turn the tide at the ballot box, just weren't being reached by arguments about the Constitution or about the legal reasons that gay couples wanted to marry. I mean, in theory, these voters agreed that gay couples should not be treated unfairly, but they didn't yet understand the importance of marriage, why it had to be marriage. Now, at this point in an argument, it can be tempting to say things like, well, they should vote for it just because it's right. You hear that a lot in progressive circles. But when it comes to an election, being right is irrelevant if you don't have the votes. When you work on a political campaign, especially one that is changing something, you do not have the luxury of only appealing to people who already agree with you. In a DevOps organization, whether that's a business or a political campaign, the first step to enacting true and lasting change is to let go of the need to be right. Now, that doesn't mean letting go of doing what's right, but it means letting go of needing to be right, needing to feel that self-superiority that comes from feeling like you're right and someone else is wrong. Now, the Approve 74 campaign understood from the beginning that in order to enact real change, in order to help gay couples achieve those full marriage rights, they needed to let go of being right and meet people where they were. Remember, hearts and minds change through personal connections. The campaign recruited hundreds of phone-bank volunteers, myself included, to personally call every registered voter in Washington State and have a personal conversation with them. All of these conversations were framed around first listening to where the voter was on the subject of gay marriage and why they felt that way. Only after that would the caller bring up the subject of love and commitment, that gay couples want to marry for the same reason that different sex couples want to marry. Now, in order to be effective, these conversations had to happen human to human. Frankly, automation just doesn't work when the subject of the conversation is love. Personal connections require human interaction. Even with our wondrous advances in technology and automation, humans are still needed for certain things. We don't, yet at least, make the same emotional connection with machines. And as much as we try to consider ourselves rational beings, voting is a very emotional decision for many people, especially when they are changing their position from something that they believed before. In a business, technical and cultural transformations are also very emotional because people are having to confront and possibly change deeply held beliefs. The need for human-to-human conversations in situations like this cannot be overstated. The purpose of automation is to free up humans to do what they do best. Automation does not make humans less important. Rather, it allows humans to focus on where they are most needed. And in the case of this campaign, it was making those personal, emotional connections and having nuanced conversation with voters. Now, even though these conversations ultimately needed to be human-driven, automation played a big role in allowing these conversations to happen, especially when we could use automatic dialers. Now, before we had the automatic dialers, we had a spreadsheet of thousands of numbers to call, a printed out spreadsheet. I had a little ruler that I put below each number to make sure I didn't call the same number twice, and I did that by accident a few times. But we would have to hand dial all those numbers into prepaid cell phones. Now, as you can imagine, this is not efficient, and it's extremely error-prone. Dialing numbers very clearly needed to be automated. So we switched to automatic dialers, which would only connect the line when someone actually picked up on it, which freed up the human volunteers to focus on the actual conversations. Now, in the end, it all comes down to Election Day. Working on a campaign is always fast-paced, but the last 6 weeks or so are an all-out sprint to Election Day. That's when you find out, often though not always on the same day, whether all that work, all that outreach, all those conversations ultimately lead to victory. Now, when you win an election, it's sublime. There is no greater high, there's no greater rush. There is to see your work pay off in such a tangible way. When the votes were pouring in on Election Day 2012 and it became clear that Referendum 74 was going to pass, it was the most deeply emotional and most glorious triumph I have ever felt in my life. But the hard truth is you won't always win. You won't always win. Losing an election is devastating. After the 2016 election, I honestly felt shattered. I think all of us who worked on that campaign felt absolutely shattered because we had poured so much of our hearts and souls into it, and ultimately the election did not go the way we wanted it to. That's the hard truth of politics. When the votes are finally counted, the count won't always be in your favor. But a loss does not mean there is no value. I guarantee if you're involved in politics for more than a couple of campaigns, you will see a loss of a campaign that you really cared about. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. If you give up after a failure in politics, you are in the wrong business. If you give up after a failure in DevOps, you are in the wrong business. This is because there will always be both successes and failures. There's always going to be a mix of the two. You will not see every election turn out the way you want it to, and you will not see every business project, IT or otherwise, become a success. That is just the reality of the world we live in. Now, when you pour yourself into a campaign or into a work project and it ultimately fails, especially if it's the first time you've experienced a failure like that, it can be easy to retreat into cynicism and ambivalence as a way to cope. The problem is cynicism and ambivalence breed complacency, and that kills any sort of transformation or progress. If you really want to see change, if you really want to make something better, whether it's in your business or society in general, resist the urge to descend into cynicism, because cynicism and ambivalence are the greatest weapons against progress, whether in business or in politics. If you resign yourself to the belief that nothing will never change, you don't try to change it, and it doesn't change, and it becomes a vicious cycle. It's far better to take the lessons learned. I 100% guarantee you will have learned something and carry it forward. There will always be another election. There will always be another project, technology or otherwise, that can build on what you learned. Now, back in January of 2017, I was overjoyed when I noticed this on GitHub. The code I wrote for the Hillary B&B project was forked and used by the Women's March on Washington. That's the beauty of open source. It's not just me or not just one campaign that can build on what we learned. Anyone can fork it and build upon it. Now, even when you're not able to achieve victory the first time, you can build building blocks upon which others can keep building as they also reach for victory. And maybe next time they'll even win. So coming back to this question from the beginning, what does DevOps have to do with politics? Well, when it comes to using technology to capture hearts, minds, and votes, to driving the elections which determine the direction of our government and society, the answer is simply everything. Thank you.